When you say, I don't care about the right to privacy because I have nothing to hide, that's no different than saying, I don't care about freedom of speech because I have nothing to say, or freedom of the press because I have nothing to write.
You all come to us young people for hope. How dare you?
I always park in disabled bays. I'm not a bad person, but I'm a quick person. Most people are slow and stupid. I'm fast.
Authority Inversion, a new theory that explains why we now gravitate toward the truth of the underdog, even when it's dangerous. We live in a world that is growing increasingly skeptical of authority. Why do 3 million people trust skincare tutorials from 17-year-olds on TikTok more than seasoned dermatologists? Why does a figure like Andrew Tate gain traction advising, skip college, just hustle, when not everyone has the access or capital to follow his path? In 1928, under the cloak of midnight, tragedy struck California. The St. Francis Dam, designed by William Mulholland, the legendary engineer behind Los Angeles' water system, collapsed without warning. A 40-meter wall of water surged with apocalyptic force, obliterating towns like Santa Clara Valley and drowning over 400 people in moments. This was a structure built with absolute authority, with unwavering trust in the era's finest engineers. Yet it harbored invisible flaws, tiny fissures whispering of doom. Why were they ignored? Because the technocratic authority of the time was too confident in its infallibility, until nature proved them wrong. And when that dam broke, trust in the old authority crumbled with it. Now look at our world, my child. Governments, academics, media, they've long controlled the flow of information, filtering which truths we're allowed to believe. But today, we see cracks, a crisis of trust, major scandals, exposed lies, the fractures widen. And as people lose faith in old institutions, they now seek truth in new streams, influencers, Telegram groups, viral TikTok moments. New authorities rise from the rubble of the old. This is authority inverted, my child. Not just a crisis of trust in the elite like populism or the counter-publics theory proposed by Nancy Fraser. This theory highlights a unique shift where trust is not merely diminishing, but actively transferring to figures once considered outsiders, even adversaries of formal authority. A self-reinforcing cycle of power displacement. My child, searching for truth is a lifelong journey, and no one can walk this path alone. If your heart wishes to walk with me, stay here. One day my footprints may fade from your path. But if you choose to remain, following my steps, I'll guide you, not with answers, but with questions. We'll wander through ideas, interrogate the world, and seek meaning at every crossroads of life. My child, how are you? I hope as you watch or listen to this, you're in good health and joyful spirits. Have you seen my previous video? In it, I explained the fractal theory of power, a theory I crafted by distilling Michel Foucault's ideas on power and interweaving them with Nassim Taleb's anti-fragility. A complex theory simplified for you, my child, using language that makes it easier for you to grasp. The fractal theory posits that power spreads, never centralizes. A father raising and protecting his child mirrors a boss managing employees, or a nation's leader guarding borders and surveilling citizens. Fractal power flows from nations to offices, offices to households, households to individual minds. From micro to macro, its patterns grow more obscured. My child, here's what's fascinating. This fractal power isn't just spreading, it's inverting. People no longer trust the roots of authority, governments, academics. Instead, they turn to wild saplings sprouting at society's edges. This is authority inversion. Trust no longer trickles top down, but surges bottom up, even from places once dismissed as trash. In 2024, according to Edelman Trust Barometer, faith in media and official institutions has plummeted by over 50% this past decade. Meanwhile, 60% now trust information from people like them, influencers, online communities, or niche forums. Picture this, my child. A doctor stands at a press conference, presenting charts and statistical data. He speaks carefully, using words like correlation, empirical data, and peer-reviewed research. Meanwhile, an influencer speaks from their bedroom, saying, "I tried this myself, and it worked. I know how you feel." They won't tell you this. Who do we trust more? The old authority speaks in logic. The new authority speaks in lived experience. One wields academic credibility, the other emotional credibility. This is not just a crisis of trust, it's a psychological revolt. Like the French Revolution's guillotine, society now beheads old authorities, even if it means replacing them with uncertainty. Simply put, we're tearing down the old palace, but have no blueprint for the new. Some call this progress, a new era of free expression. But look at its consequences. On one hand, we have the democratization of knowledge. A farmer can now learn how to grow crops from a YouTube tutorial. On the other, we have epistemic chaos, where hoaxes become a new religion, and conspiracy theories turn into scriptures. My child, this is the greatest danger of authority inversion. We are gambling with existence itself, wagering on forces we do not yet understand. Foucault warned of decentralized power. Now we must ask, decentralized to where? Who holds it? And what if those wild saplings are more toxic than the roots we cut down? My child, the theory of authority inversion is rooted in 3 conceptual theories. So when I invite you to think, I am not explaining things based on my personal arguments. There is a structured framework behind every explanation I present to you. The first comes from Max Weber and his theory of the legitimacy of power. According to Weber, power can be obtained and held by traditional communities, such as tribal leaders, local kings, or elders. Society recognizes their authority as long as there is trust in long-standing traditions and customs. Next, power can be held by charismatic figures, those with extraordinary personalities or personal magnetism. These could be revolutionary leaders or spiritual figures who inspire deep loyalty. Finally, there is rational legal authority, which is granted through legal systems and institutions built on rational oversight. This includes individuals like academics, presidents, and judges who derive their power from formal structures rather than personal traits. Weber saw the shift from traditional and charismatic authority to rational legal authority as a hallmark of modern civilization. Emotional and custom-based power was gradually being replaced by legitimacy rooted in legal and procedural systems. Interestingly, the theory of authority inversion views this as a reversal of the modernization process Weber described. If Weber saw an evolution from traditional and charismatic authority toward rational legal authority, authority inversion suggests the opposite is now happening: the weakening of rational legal authority and the resurgence of charisma-based and emotion-driven power. Does this mean we are regressing? Not necessarily. The second framework comes from an intriguing book I read, The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols, published in 2017. This book explores how society has become increasingly dismissive of experts, preferring instead to seek out information that aligns with their own biases. Nichols describes this phenomenon as mass ignorance. He blames anti-intellectualism, the influence of the internet, and the arrogance of lay people who believe they can outsmart experts just by reading a few articles on Google. People tend to trust personal experience or so-called common sense over academic research that has been rigorously studied for decades. But my child, you might wonder, what did Nichols overlook in The Death of Expertise? Doesn't the theory of authority inversion sound like just a grander name for the same idea? Here's where things get interesting. While Nichols examines the decline of trust in traditional authority, he does not fully explore what replaces it. Nichols explains why people are losing faith in established institutions, but he does not discuss the rise of influencers and how new forms of authority are emerging to challenge and replace the old. He also does not explore what happens when this shift becomes uncontrollable. Nichols focuses on the conflict between the general public and experts, but he does not analyze who is taking the place of those experts or how this new form of authority is constructed in the digital era. This is precisely where the theory of authority inversion steps in. It does not merely analyze the loss of trust in old authority structures. It also examines how new forms of authority arise, evolve, and gradually take over. At the beginning of 2020, when the world was coming to terms with the scale of the COVID-19 pandemic, Global health organizations like the WHO or World Health Organization and the CDC or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention became the center of public attention. In a global health crisis, institutions like these should have been the primary authorities guiding the world. But something unexpected happened. Public trust in them began to crumble. One of the key triggers was a statement made by the WHO in January 2020, which declared that masks were unnecessary for healthy individuals in preventing the virus's spread. A few months later, the WHO reversed its stance, recommending masks for everyone. Although this change was based on evolving scientific data, many saw it as proof of inconsistency and incompetence in handling the pandemic. As trust in the WHO and CDC declined, people started looking elsewhere for information. Social media became fertile ground for figures outside formal academic circles, figures who wielded mass appeal rather than institutional legitimacy. One such figure was Dr. Robert Malone, a scientist involved in the development of mRNA technology, the foundation of COVID-19 vaccines. However, instead of advocating for mass vaccination, Malone became a vocal critic. Within months, Dr. Malone appeared on major platforms, including the Joe Rogan Experience, which reaches millions of listeners. His narrative did not just question the effectiveness of vaccines. It painted a picture of governments and health institutions hiding the truth from the public. This marks a major shift in the structure of authority in modern society. Previously, scientific and medical authority rested on formal institutions and rigorous academic research. Now, new authority does not require academic legitimacy, only popularity and a compelling narrative. This is the essence of authority inversion, where traditional authority loses its power, while charismatic and accessible figures take over as the new sources of truth. The COVID-19 pandemic was not just a test for global health systems. I see it as a large-scale observation of shifting authority in the digital age. The WHO and CDC had data and research, my child, but they lost the war of trust. And in an era where trust is more valuable than facts, narratives often appear stronger than evidence. The final conceptual framework for understanding authority inversion, my child, is something called the Streisand effect. This term was coined by Mike Masnick, a journalist and founder of TechDirt, in 2005. It originates from an incident where singer Barbra Streisand tried to remove a photo of her house from the internet, but her attempt only made the photo go viral. In the digital age, this effect has grown stronger due to the decentralized nature of the internet and algorithm-driven engagement. The more something is seen as forbidden or censored, the more people want to see it. Psychologically, humans are drawn to what is hidden. When information is labeled as secret or restricted, it often becomes more desirable. Social media and algorithms amplify this effect by prioritizing viral content. Ironically, censorship efforts often trigger even greater discussion and broaden the reach of the very information they were meant to suppress. This is a paradox, my child. Attempts to control information often accelerate its spread instead. My child, there was a time when truth was seen as something to be discovered, tested, and agreed upon. But now, in the endless flood of information, truth has become a battlefield where the victor is not the one who is most correct, but the one who is the loudest. We are living in an era of authority inversion. Existentialism teaches you that a free human being must define their own meaning in life. But my child, that freedom comes with a heavy burden. The responsibility to distinguish right from wrong without an absolute guide. History is full of moments where old authorities fell, not necessarily to those who were more truthful, but to those who were louder. My child, in a world filled with conflicting voices, how do we know what is true? History bears witness that humans are not just seekers of truth, but also creatures often trapped in the shadows of uncertainty. The inversion of authority, the phenomenon where alternative voices replace established authority, is proof of this uncertainty. But does authority inversion always mean falsehood? Or is it a deeper symptom, an existential one, born from humanity's frustration with authorities that fail to provide meaning? We see a clear example of authority inversion in the 19th century anti-vaccine movement in England. When Edward Jenner introduced the smallpox vaccine, a wave of fear swept through society. Scientists and doctors, once regarded as the bearers of medical truth, were suddenly doubted. Pamphlets circulated, warning of the dangers of vaccination, branding it a conspiracy to harm public health. Figures like William Tebb and Alfred Russel Wallace, a naturalist, not a doctor, spread theories that vaccination was a government plot to control the population. This was not just a rejection of science, but a quest for meaning. Those who opposed vaccination believed they were reclaiming control over their own bodies and lives. This is existentialism in its rawest form. Humans rejecting external authority in pursuit of their own truth, even if that truth stands against the facts. But is every instance of authority inversion wrong? Or could it sometimes be a necessary resistance against an authority that has indeed lost its credibility? History is full of cases where so-called alternative authorities have brought forth a greater truth. Galileo, for example, challenged the Church's insistence that the Earth was the center of the universe. However, the problem arises when authority inversion is not based on facts, but on emotion and fear. This is where nihilism enters the equation. Nihilism teaches that there is no inherent meaning in this world. When traditional authority loses trust, humanity faces a void. And to fill that void, people search for new narratives, often without concern for whether those narratives are true. Thus, in this context, authority inversion is not just an issue of misinformation. It is an existential crisis, a human struggle to grasp reality, choosing instead to cling to truths that offer emotional comfort rather than objective reality. My child, look at the world today. If authority inversion is left unchecked, we will be left with a world where facts no longer have a place. In that 19th century anti-vaccine movement, the city of Leicester became a center of resistance. Over 80,000 people protested. At first, they felt victorious when the British government softened its stance by passing the Vaccination Act of 1898, which introduced the concept of conscientious objection. They successfully rejected mandatory vaccination, not because they were right, but because they shouted the loudest. But what happened next? In the end, Leicester saw a devastating resurgence of smallpox cases, and hundreds of people died. Death became the consequence of freedom that was not rooted in proper understanding. Just as misguided existentialism can lead to nihilism, unchecked authority inversion can lead to societal collapse. My child, the world is not black and white. Not all authorities deserve blind trust, and not all alternative voices should be dismissed. But one thing is certain: critical thinking is the way out of this chaos. We must learn to distinguish between healthy skepticism and blind rejection. The solution is not to reject authority inversion, but to understand why it happens. If traditional authorities wish to regain public trust, they must become more transparent, open to criticism, and adaptable. Meanwhile, individuals must learn that freedom of thought does not mean rejecting everything from old authorities, but questioning with a solid foundation. My child, in an era where anyone can become an authority, where countless influencers flood social media, claiming one thing is false and another is true, your task is not just to choose whom to trust. Your task is to develop the right way of thinking so you don't get lost in the ever-changing waves of information. Because if you're not careful, you won't just lose the truth, you may lose the meaning of life itself. If you have no guiding principles, my child, then you should create one. That will be enough. Until the next voice note. I love you, my child.